kids love log.
'Tis the podcast log
Yes, log.
of the Star Wars Collectors Archive blog. Oh.
Yes, log.
Whenever the Star Wars Collectors Archive publishes a new blog, this podcast will log its contents, interview its writers, and go deeper. It's the Chivecast Blog Log Pod.
You, sir, are a mouthful.
Relax and just take life easy for a little while. Because it's only lasts for a little while.
You are not going to hear the W word on this podcast. This is not normal. This is the Blog Log Pod. And you'll hear Digby in the back. We don't care. We're not going to re-record it. This is a quick shot. This is a quick hit. This is dropping fire in a bottle. No, I'm not even going to finish that metaphor. We're going to keep going. We're going to be lean and mean. I'm here with Stephen B. Danley. Steve, my name is Skye Payne, and I'm one of the co-hosts
Yes, it is.
of the Star Wars Collectors Archive podcast, which are usually in between 2 and 3 hours, involve several guests, go on and on interminably. We are a part of the Star Wars Collectors Archive, and we consistently had amazing content on the Star Wars Collectors Archive that was then being publicized and used to help other podcasts. This got Steve and I so annoyed that we decided to start a whole nother podcast. I'm not even going to correct that, Steve. We are going so quickly. What's it called, Steve?
The Chivecast Blog Log Pod.
That's right.
I mean, I said that right.
Yes. The Chivecast Blog Pod Blog. So, over the last couple of months, over the last year, really, Tommy did this amazing write-up about the stages of a figure production, and he ended up being on the Vintage Rebellion, and so we didn't want him on because we don't want to have all the same stuff every month. And then Yehuda, of course, we're still looking for a new Huda. Yehuda went on there to talk about the Yuppies, and then Ron Salvatore is scheduled for an interview with the Vintage Rebellion about an unrelated item later. But we don't want them to scoop us on this, which is a post I've been waiting to talk about for years, because Ron has whispered this to me in secret over the years, and said,
you're ahead of me there.
Yeah, and said someday I'm going to unveil this, and the world will barely mention it. So that's what's happened. As always, one of the functions of the Star Wars Collectors Archive podcast, in either its normal form or its blog log, is to feature and really function on the Star Wars Collectors Archive, because there's so much good stuff that's being done there. And if you're not reading the blog, you are not a Star Wars vintage collector. You're just not. So we're helping to bring people to that space. Right, Steve?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm being so good, Steve, that I'm not even going to go into a 15-minute dissertation about my new theme song. But I can tell you one thing, Steve. My new theme song is so complex, the form so magically reflects the function. It is as though I am the Johann Sebastian Bach of bullcrap samples and weird references.
I want to say, it did pretty much blow my mind.
You don't even... You know what I'm going to do, Steve? After they say goodbye, I'll explain it to you, everything that I did. And if you really want to hear it. But right now, Steve, let's talk to Chris Georgoulias and Ron Salvatore. Ron Salvatore because he wrote this article, and Chris Georgoulias because apparently he was comically upset at how little response this got. People, you need to respond to this. We need to care about this stuff. We're talking about not just unproduced Ewoks. We're talking about unknown Ewoks. Star Wars toys Star Wars toys that were literally never known to have existed. It wasn't that people didn't know where they were. They didn't know they existed. We have discovered a 10th planet, people, and its name is Kaink. So so we're going to get Ron on.
You can slow down, Skye. I've never heard you speak this fast, ever.
I'm speaking eloquently, though, right?
Yes. No, I mean, it's remarkable. Sorry, didn't mean to hit the brakes there.
No, it's fine. I'll go back to my normal talking. You see, Steve, now I'm going to talk boring. All right, fine. So should we call him Steve?
Yeah, let's get Ron from there.
All right, cool. So let's get Ron and Chris Georgoulias to talk about unknown, unproduced Ewoks from the Blog Log Pod. We are lobbing blog bombs. Okay, Steve, I've just explained before recording to Chris and to Ron that this is going to be a little mini episode. What's it called, Steve?
Oh, geez, you're gonna really make me do this again. You know how much this tortures me. The Kivecast blog log pod.
Yes, the Kivecast blog log pod, and this is going to be little small episodes, designed to highlight the archive. And so we brought Ron on because he wrote the article, and we brought Chris on because he's the other sort of expert who always answers our phone calls about pre-production stuff.
Right.
Kenner produced a certain number of Ewok toys in the normal production quantity. They then were going to continue the line, and they made pre-production items up through the first shot stage. Right? So they have hard copies and first shots. Is that correct, Chris?
That's correct.
That's correct.
They had six figures in their first series, and they were going to do another 6 in their second series.
Okay. And so the second... Okay, let's see how many of these I get, Steve. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm excited for this.
Okay, I'm just going with Ewoks here.
Unproduced.
I'm just going with Ewoks. So I'm going to say... Gaff.
All right, next.
Duloc.
Sort of.
Partial credit.
Shitter. Shitter's one of them, isn't he? Oh, I remember from Ron's
Shitter
article.
is one of them, yeah.
Shitter and Bondo. I remember those two. Morag.
Yeah?
And Weechi.
Yeah.
You got a few. You can keep going. You got a few more.
That's
in you,
all
right?
I got.
That's
okay.
it?
So how many did I get right, Steve?
Not many.
More than half.
More than half. Okay, so I am now looking at the article here. They are Shitter, Chief Chirpa. Oh, okay. So he was produced as a Kenner toy, but unproduced as an Ewok. Bondo, Paplu, Morag, and Weechi.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many of, how hard is it to put together a full set of these unproduced Ewoks, Chris?
Well, I think there's only one full. Well, a lot of times people group the unproduced droids and unproduced Ewoks as part of a whole set.
But if we're just saying, because unproduced droids are cool,
if you're just putting the 6 together, I don't know how many sets are around. I would say there may be 5 complete sets, but I think when you get to weapons, it's harder. I think the Morag staff, the Morag weapons are hard. She had a staff in a pot. And then the Chittor whip is hard. I think the Chief Chirpa bag is a harder one. And then if you're willing to mix the types of figures, like some people have, painted hard copies, and some have first shots, some are unpainted first shots. So sometimes you take what you can get on those.
Right.
And but, overall, they're still quite rare. I mean, there may be that many full sets, maybe 5 full sets of 6. But there's so many dispersed in collections where people have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them or so.
Right, and so
I don't know how many total.
So these are basically for Star Wars collectors, at a certain level, right? So there's the sort of first level where I just like the toys, or I just want all the loose figures. But when you reach a certain point, when you really like the really rare stuff, unproduced droids and unproduced Ewoks, which we call oods, right? Well, wait,
you call oods?
Wait, that wasn't me. Did I come up with oods?
No, Andrew
I think
McKinley
Chris
came up with,
started that.
Andrew or Chris or something like that.
I mean, I know they were called UDEs, but am I the one who called them oods?
In terms of pronunciation?
Yeah, you'd be the only one that turned it into a word.
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
Good.
Before Mox and Alpha.
Right.
Yes.
See, you're just adding to the problems.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with calling them mocks.
No, it's not.
Okay, so there's all these oods, but we're not really talking about oods. We're talking about ooies, which are unproduced Ewoks, of course. These represent one of the hardest runs to put together. We'll go into this later when we actually get into the Ewoks, in a couple
eight years from now.
Yeah, in a couple of years, because I think it's one of the weirdest markets in collecting. But the thing that Ron told me about was that beyond these 6 insanely hard-to-find Ewoks, Shitter, Chief Chirpa, Bondo, Paplu, Morag, and Weechi, there are other Ewoks. And how long have you known about this, Ron?
probably 12 years or something like that. They all turned up from a single sculptor, and it was probably 10 to 12 years ago at this point. So, a while.
Wow.
It hasn't been like a big secret. It just wasn't really something that was published on the internet or anything like that. So people didn't really know about it, unless you went to the people's houses to see them.
Right. So let's. I do want to get to the story about how you found them. We'll go through the article. I was going to read the entire thing, but apparently that'd be too embarrassing for Ron. So I will say this. Go to the blog and read it, because Ron makes several funny jokes. He has many funny links. Like, he has a link of Lou Ferrigno fighting a bear as Hercules, which I don't know how he found it. But if you've never seen Lou Ferrigno as Hercules fighting a bear,
it's something you need to see.
Yeah. So what we have is the first character, and he chooses who, Steve?
Tebow.
Now, in the last episode of the podcast, we talked about a box of 147 Tebows that the Lemcoolers found.
Right.
But this is a very, very different thing. Now, one of the main things about the Ewoks from the animated series is they look a lot different than the ones from the movie. How would you describe the difference between Tebow, the unproduced sculpt, versus Tebow, the Kenner figure, Ron? How would you describe those differences?
Well, the Kenner sculpt, I described him as a Keebler elf in the blog post, because he kind of looks like he has that kind of look about him. He's kind of cute with a little hat and a feather on it, whereas the Tebow in the movie line is kind of a warrior-looking guy who's got a dead pig on his head and has an axe and all that stuff. So he looks quite tough in the movie line, but he does not look tough at all in the Ewoks line.
It's because he was a poet, right?
Yeah, apparently I can't confess that I've ever watched more than an episode of the Ewoks TV show, but apparently in the show he's a poet and a lover as well.
That's true. We'll get into that, I guess, with the next figure.
Okay, so yeah, this is definitely a huge difference. And I do wonder, do any of you have any idea why they would decide that he was a savage warrior in one and then just super gentle in the next? Like, why didn't they just pick a different name? It's really weird.
I don't know.
Yeah, my guess is that they just needed a character that was that type of character for the show, and they had that name, and they were just like, oh, I'll make that Tebow. It is kind of weird. You think they would have picked a character they didn't make a figure of, because everybody has an image of Tebow in their minds from the figure line. He was gray and everything, and in the show he was brown. So,
right.
I don't know. I just think it's an instance of them reusing a name. It's clearly not the same character. But, it's not like you see Tebow in the movie do anything that you'd remember anyway. So,
right.
Who knows?
Yeah, and then Chief Chirp is like this cool-looking chief in the movie, and then the figure, I think he's actually based on Wilford Brimley, because he's got that really long, crazy beard. Okay, you know what, Steve? This is not for Blog Log Pod. This is for Normal Show.
No, this is later, Skye.
Yes. So another thing that goes along with this are these sort of model sheets. Chris, would you like to explain what these model sheets are, where they came from?
Yeah, that's completely unrelated. Those model sheets, there was just a guy on eBay that was selling animation cells, and he had tons and tons of model cells. They would draw up, Nelvana would draw it up, and they would send them to their overseas, they had, I think it was in Korea, the people doing the actual animation for the shows that paint all the cells.
Right.
But they would draw the model cells up, and it would just show, here's the colors. They would describe, the Pantone colors for each character, and different features. And not just characters. They would do model cells for anything, like a ship or a spoon, or, there were tons and tons of these things. Right. And they just so happened to have those for the characters. And you had a lot of the ones from the produced characters, the 6 produced characters, but, other things from the TV show as well, things that never were turned into toys. But just so happened to have those model cells and save the images. And some of those, I bought a couple of those myself, just to have as a sort of a companion piece. But they weren't used by Kenner specifically like that. But the artwork did make it into the reference material that was sent to Kenner. So I guess it is related, but those didn't come from the Kenner source. Those were.
Yeah, they're really nice looking. I mean, in case people don't know, Nelvana is the name of the Canadian animation company centered out of Toronto that made the Ewoks and Kenner cartoon. So just in case people don't know that. So that's what we have. I guess if you look at the sculpt and then you look at the character sheet, you can sort of imagine what the character would look like. And Steve, I got to admit, I have... There's something about this next one, Steve, that I like a lot.
Oh, no. Oh,
no.
no.
Don't you? I mean, I'm not wrong, am I? Is it just me who's feeling this? Who's the next one, Steve?
Are you attracted to the Ewok?
I mean,
Well.
I wouldn't say I'm not, you know.
Would that qualify as bestiality, or do you think it'd be something else?
I don't know if we want to know. What I don't think we need to.
I can neither confirm nor deny. But anyways, next up is Latara.
Right. It's Tebow's squeeze, right?
Apparently, from Wikipedia, which is my source for all this stuff, yeah, apparently Tebow is keen for her affections.
Yeah, he's writing her poetry, and she's got these kind of like purple eyes, and you know.
I like how Wikipedia said they had a rocky courtship, eventually getting together later in their adolescence. It's like,
I mean,
what? Really?
Was that like a rocky courtship actually portrayed in the cartoon? Like I remember.
I'm wondering.
This
Get the hell out of here, Tebow! No.
They're throwing like bones at each other and stuff. No
I
idea.
thought you loved me. I did love you, but I was a different person back then. Yeah, not. Okay, so, all right. So Latara, very, I don't know, a lot less goofy looking, a lot less stupid looking of a figure. And what do you find interesting about this one, Ron?
It looks more finished in the Tebow, so that's interesting. The details are more solid. It's hard to say whether that's because it was worked on more or possibly the sculptor who worked on it just, decided to make it more detailed. Because, I mean, different people may have been responsible for these, so it's hard to know exactly their methods of working on them. The other thing is that it's missing some details that are evident on the cell, so it's kind of, in the blog post I speculated that the Kenner one may have been based on an earlier Nelvana design. Like there's no braid. There's a big braid on the final character, and there's a big lick of hair on her as well that are not on the figure. But I wouldn't be surprised if you found an early version of Latara that didn't have those details.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more detailed than the Tebow. I mean, the Tebow looks kind of rushed, kind of unfinished. Now, what materials are these made out of, Chris?
They're all wax.
Okay,
They're
so
the actual sculpts, and that's as far as those got. So that's the 3D form, and then they abandoned those characters.
how certain are you that this is as far as they went?
Well, no pieces have ever turned up, and I'm pretty sure you can even. There's not even any parting lines where they had pulled the mold from those figures. So you'd have to pull a mold from those, a silicone mold, to go to the next stage to make hard copies. And it does not look like they pulled molds from those at all. And those are the only pieces that have ever turned up. So
also in the case of the Kaink.
We're not ready for Kaink yet. We got to save Kaink for last.
But it ties into this, and we'll talk about it later. But the fact that there's a sculpting book that does not have anything added to it would suggest that that was. They got as far as the bucks, at least, on at least one of those figures, and then that was that. So, I mean, that pretty much tells you what happened.
Okay.
Or seem to indicate.
Well, I think we're going to tease that. We'll talk about the Kaink buck later. So the actual figures that were produced came out in '85, and then in '86 they were going to release these other 6 figures that we have hard copies and first shots of. Are all of these sculpts from the same time as the unproduced figures, or are they after? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's more likely that they're from early in the line and that they just got cut out of the first series.
Because they're kind of like primary characters of the show, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of unproduced figures, like say the Dagobah micro collection stuff is from early in the line, not later in the line. It's not from the '83 sets. They were considered for the initial wave, and then they were cut. And there's other stuff like that too. And it seems more likely that they would have been early. and then for whatever reason they decided not to release them, and they went with more Dulocs or something like that. Also, Kaink was not in the second series of the show, in the second season, so pretty unlikely that Kenner would have done a figure for a character that was not in the second series, or in the second season, I should say. So, it does make sense that they would have made or thought about making a Kaink for the first season, because that character is in an important episode with the Ewok Battle Wagon. Doesn't make much sense that they would have done it for the second season. So I think we always pretty much assumed that they were early and cut out at that point.
Wow. Well, that's such good information, Steve, that I'm going to forgive the fact that he's once again trying to bring up Kaink too early. I'm getting really anxious about the Kaink management.
It's interwoven, that's right.
Oh, jeez.
But no, I find that really, I actually didn't know that a lot of the unproduced stuff came early in the line. And I think people listening to the show, that's
No. You're sort of like mixing things back and forth interchangeably. So there were 6 figures that came out at 85.
Yes.
And then in 86, they were going to do another series of 6, and those would be unproduced ones.
Right.
And the ones we're talking about, the 4 we're talking about here, predate the 85 set.
Okay,
So
right.
You're
So
talking about pre-unproduced almost. That's
Abandoned.
Yeah, I think
Abandoned.
that's right.
abandoned idea, right?
Yeah, it is true that there's a lot of the unproduced stuff. People have a tendency to think, oh, this is something that was going to be made later, but it's not true. Like Gargan was an earlier Jedi figure. It's not a later, post Power of the Force thing.
Shelved.
Luke in robes is not a post Power of the Force thing. It ended up being an early Jedi, figure that was changed. So a lot of the stuff that people talk about originally thought was like a later thing ended up being something that was just a developmental relic from earlier in the line that just never got made. A lot of stuff is like that.
We get to my personal favorite, and actually this totally makes sense that's early in the line, and it's always befuddled me that there's so little Nisa stuff.
So, like Steve said, they're major characters, so you would have guessed that they might have considered releasing them, and you can sort of see why they would have cut them out. They're both, I hate to say it, but 3 of them are female characters, which, they tend to have a poor record, and there's not many female characters in the original Star Wars line, so you can see them getting cut out. Tebow's kind of, lame. Wicket's much cooler. It remains a mystery to me why Kenner released 3 similar-looking Dulocs in the same series. But
that's always been weird to me. But
maybe they did testing with kids, and the kids liked the Dulocs somehow, or I don't know. But that's always been odd to me that there was 3 Dulocs in there.
But I can't believe they never released Nisa, because I don't know much about the Ewoks, but I know Nisa and Wicket. That's the whole storyline of the show. It'd be like
and the plush figures too, right? I mean, they had it's not like she wasn't represented in other products, right?
I mean, Ice Capades.
Plush is I think a line that they probably figured girls would buy. My guess is the figures that Kenner was kind of thinking this is a boy's line.
Keeping it
so
that
it
way.
wouldn't surprise me if that was part of why they didn't do the Latara and Nisa. But who knows?
So so Nisa, and again, you need to go to the blog post, blog.swca.com, and read Ron's great writing, because there's lots of funny stuff, and I'm not going to embarrass him by saying any of the funny jokes that he makes about the nature of Nisa, who is apparently Sherpa's daughter. But yeah, this is another one that's pretty close to production.
I don't know how much more time it would have taken to make that Tebow look a little bit cleaner, but probably wouldn't have taken that much longer. So I think they just all sort of abandoned at the same time, and that's as far as they got.
These are all not that close to production, but they're all a similar stage. They're like preliminary sculpts, that if they had done them more, they would have done more sophisticated ones with the bucks and all that stuff, and that apparently did not happen.
Right. Now, Steve, if this were a regular show, I would probably go on to the female archetypes of Ewoks and go into the design of Nisa as very clearly appealing to this, appealing to the Madonna that we're looking for, and then Latara being the whore. This whole, I mean, really, they're modeling the way they look, the way they're dressed. It's all the semiotics of one is domestic and then the other is just purely sexual.
Skye just called an Ewok a whore.
that just happened.
I'm just saying it's out there. It's very clear. I'm gonna write a little thesis about it when we get to the Ewoks. So you guys
save that for when you can really just go off the chain.
All right, Steve. That brings us up to the Kaink. And I've always known that we're going to call this episode Punch 'em in the Kaink. Because I do think Kaink would be a good part of the anatomy. I don't know exactly where it is, but I think if you get punched in the Kaink, it would hurt.
It's not going to be good.
It probably would hurt.
Yeah, it probably would hurt. Now, Kaink is the one that confuses me the most.
It's a weird one.
So I'm actually just going to read Ron's write-up because I don't care at this point. He can hang up. Finally, there's Kaink. What's a Kaink? The Ewok priestess. Duh. So, priestess, but it totally looks like a dude and has a mustache. This is now me talking.
You know what? Just to interrupt you, I originally had it in the blog post, but deleted it because I figured it was unconfirmable that the character may have originally been a male. Because if you look at the sculpt, which presumably is the earlier version, it's got like a big mustache and it's got these hairy ears, and then the final design, which you can see on the model cell, is much more. They got rid of like the big mustache and all. They made the character less hairy, so I almost wonder if maybe it was a male character at some point.
Well, then the live action character was female, right? In the Caravan of Courage. So that was
maybe
before...
they figured they already had low gray, and
they need a
I don't know, but it does definitely look hairier in the figure.
When we were trying to find out what the heck that Kaink was, I scanned through all. I mean, I was like watching it on fast forward, going through all the episodes of all the Ewoks cartoons, looking for something that looked like that. Because I'm looking for a monster.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. Kind of looks like the monster from the movie, that giant thing, right? What was that thing called?
Okay. So first of all, what movie are we talking about? Let's back up.
Caravan of Courage. Caravan of Courage, the live action. It looks like the Gorax, the giant thing that eats the children or whatever, but just in Ewok form.
I don't know anything you're talking about. I saw Caravan of Courage when it came out on TV, and I immediately forgot.
I'm starting to reveal how secretly I know this stuff pretty well, because I grew up like loving.
The Kaink from Caravan of Courage, at least going by what Wikipedia has, does not really look much. It looks a little bit like the one from the cartoon, but not a whole lot.
Not much.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot of great writing about trying to figure out who Kaink is, and you can go there. But I'm not going to put in the drop, because we don't do drops in the Logpod Blob. But we still can talk about some kind of vocabulary. So this is where it gets to Kaink, is where it gets the most complicated thing, because there's also this. It looks like a shield with little metal rods sticking out of it, and on the top of the shield, burred into the wood, it says Kaink. And I don't know what this thing is. I actually, I didn't read this part of the article because it didn't have pictures of Latara in it. So I need you guys to explain, either A, write some fan fiction about me and Latara, or B, tell me what is this weird piece of wood with metal sticking out of it. Let's start with Chris.
Not wood.
Okay.
That's step A.
You're such a French teacher. I mean, as far as being super non-technical. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that piece is called a buck. So basically, it's a piece of brass. It's smaller than the torso of the figure. So what that is, they machine that out, and they can they rough it out, but then they have the arm spacings between the arms and the spacings between the arms and the legs set up by engineering. So, and with design and engineering, so okay, here's what the proportions are going to be, and the sculptor can sculpt around that. And then he's got the arms in the exact right spot and positions. And then they also have the joints are perfectly square, or whatever angle the legs need to be. So that's what it gives them something mechanical to work around while you're sculpting in this organic wax.
So it's almost like an armature, like at the basic start of an armature. Yeah.
Yeah, and those pins, they put pins in sort of later. They'd sculpt around it, and it would just have probably no pin in it. But the little pin right there would. It's hard to explain. They put a little plastic disc into, say, like the shoulder joint of the arm as they're working on it, and then that plastic disc would slide over that pin, and that armature like I said, keeps it all square and proportional correct.
So it would be inside of the sculpt?
It'd be inside, and they're inside all sculpts.
Okay.
If you were to X-ray the sculpts, the wax sculpts, you would see those sculpts.
Like Uncle Ron.
That would be inside a later That would be inside a later version of the sculpts, guys. So they would have redone Kaink, and that would have been in there. So that's why we refer to these as like earlier preliminary wax sculpts, because they would have been secondary, like more finished ones that had the bucks inside them if they had gone forward.
Okay, so all of these unknown, unproduced Ewoks don't have bucks in them, and that's how you know they're not super far along the line.
Yeah, that and the fact that Chris mentioned they don't have parting lines, they don't have the discs and the joints, so they're earlier, conceptual preliminary sculpts. They probably would have been used to make later, more refined finished sculpts that have the bucks and all that stuff.
Wow, I've never seen a buck before. Are there a lot of bucks hanging around? Oh, I guess they're inside all the sculpts.
There are not many around. There's not. I mean, they probably made extras here and there, but for the most part, they use most of them, or they reuse them, or machine them down and turn them into other figures. That was incredible. That one turned up from another source. And
with the name on it.
For that unproduced character with the name on it. That's the first time I've ever seen one with the name etched into it like that, or engraved into it.
If you look there's a link when it says Buck in the post. It takes you to an archive entry for another one that I have that has wax actually on it.
Yeah, right.
So there you go, for a regular figure.
I do want to go a little bit deeper into a couple things. Like, I think the article is great and it's explained everything, but Chris and Ron, were you together when you discovered these? Can you talk about discovering them at all? Can you give the sculptor a funny nickname? Is it a sculptor we've already talked to? Is there something you can talk about finding these? Because I'm sure there's a fun story there.
Yeah, we were there, both there. It was, I don't know if he needs a funny name, but it was one of the principal sculptors of the line in the vintage years. He just had them in a box with a bunch of other stuff, and at the time, it was like, oh, wow, look at this. This is looks like a Latara. Obviously, it was pretty surprising. The Kaink, we didn't necessarily know it was an Ewok figure, but it seemed pretty likely just based on the scale. But it was kind of like, well, is this like a character from Ewoks? But I never thought it was an actual Ewok.
Yeah.
And mostly because it doesn't have. It looks like a bear or something. It doesn't really look right without the cloak that it's supposed to have.
The cloak.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not just on the head like some Ewoks. It goes over the whole body.
Right.
So without that, it kind of looked a little weird. But once there's a drawing, it's in the post there, which came from a Lucasfilm piece that was sent out to Kenner and other licensees. Once that became apparent, that because it showed the cloak separate from the figure. Once that Chris saw that, it was like, well, obviously this is just the figure without the cloak on it. But at first, it was somewhat mysterious about what that was.
Can we call the sculptor the Kaink Master?
If you'd like.
No, we don't know who's. A lot of these sculptors, they ended up with sculpts just because when they cleaned out the area, they took boxes home and you kind of ended up with what was in the boxes. We first met the guy at his place of work. He was working for a different company. And he had some trilogy sculptings, and he had the Latara and the Nisa. And that was probably 15 years ago. Well, we started meeting with him over a period of years, and then finally we were allowed to start buying stuff. And then after several trips to his house, he let us into his basement. And we were rummaging through some boxes, and that's when the Tebow and the Kaink turned up together. So they were all together. They were in the basement.
Huh.
Okay.
That's when we knew that's when we thought the Kaink was an Ewok, but it didn't look like anything Ewok because Tebow was right there. So those two were paired up, and it was long after we had seen the original two. So it was the same guy, but they were in two. They just happened. The other one just happened to be in his basement in a random box, and that was like, oh my gosh, there's two more of these things. And nobody was really interested in Kaink. I was like, man, I like this thing. It's probably something. And it was a couple of years, several years later that one of the reference Bibles turned up, the Star Wars, the Droids and Ewoks Bibles. And there was that picture of Kaink with the whole cloak removed. And it was like, oh my gosh, that's the character. But without that picture, you'd never know. I mean, you couldn't determine that was an Ewok character.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit, and these things built over time, and then later on the model cells turned up, and it was like, oh, here's Kaink. Now, because we knew Kaink's name because from the Ewok Bible, it said Kaink in there, and then later on the model cells turned up, and then later on the buck turned up from somebody else. So all these, what you see now in the blog posting that Ron wrote up is a culmination of all this stuff over years put together in one spot, and then we can roll it out all at one time, and it's all like this nice, neat little package. But like with any of these runs and things, these things build in piecemeal over time from different sources.
Yeah, and Tracy Hamilton was the guy who let us use the buck. Like so thanks to him, that's a great item and brings some context to the whole thing.
So Tracy has the buck, but Chris has the sculpt.
Well, these things work out that way sometimes.
But because I think that means that you two are the main Kaink focus collectors. And it's just when Kaink stuff comes up, I don't know who to tag on Facebook. So, I mean, I guess I'll say you, Chris, because I feel like I've known you longer. But Tracy's a really good guy, too. So, I don't know. What do you do, Ron, when you come up with Kaink items? Who do you call first?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I'd like to be a member of the Kaink Club myself. Todd Chamberlain pointed out to me that Kaink is actually a licensed thing now, like in Disney stores or something. You can buy a plush Kaink.
Oh, that's right.
You can?
You know what? Yeah.
So Steve was like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I know all about that."
It's silly, but I think the live action version of that character is in the old Star Tours boarding video, and so it became this thing. Yeah.
Kaink is in Star Tours?
Yes.
Oh my God, this just gets so we should have had Tommy and we should have had Jared on here. Wow, this is a punch in the Kaink. I'm trying to get this off the ground.
Ain't that a kick in the Kaink?
It is. Ain't that a kick in the Kaink? Wow. Okay. Well, maybe I'm wrong then. Maybe there's more to Kaink than I think.
I think there's a lot more. Yeah.
No, that's about it. We've exhausted it.
Yeah. Well, that's more accurate.
Steve, I think for this, you should be the one who signs off the guests.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Well, thanks, Chris and Ron. It's been good, as always.
All right, guys. Thanks for having us on, as always.
We'll definitely do this again. I mean, that's the thing with the blog is it's been tough to kind of time it with the main episode. So I think I hope this will work out.
Sure. We'll do some model kits. Have a second
absolutely.
model kit post eventually.
Yeah.
All right, bye, guys.
Yeah.
Take it easy. Bye.
Go to the goddamn Star Wars Collector's Archive and read stuff. Ah!